Sybaris, THURII, and Copia, 3 ancient lost cities and 1 ancient lost curse. In today's episode of Lost History, we'll take a look at the rise and fall of ancient Greece's most outrageously luxurious city-state. We'll explore how it became the poster child for hedonism and excess, how its scented fountains and wine-fed horses led to its downfall, how its parties make modern frat bros look like weak little girls wearing little girl pants, and why its legacy still haunts every overpriced brunch and influencer retreat today. If you've ever wondered what happens when a civilization prioritizes nap time over national defense, then keep your eyes peeled on this video right here. I am Ancient Swan. These introductions are getting pretty good, even if I do say so myself. That was one of them. This is a video, and let's jump in. Long before influencers were pretending to enjoy low-quality chocolates in Dubai, or suing their neighbors for loud leaf blowers, there was Sybaris, the original blueprint for luxury, laziness, and lifestyle branding. Founded around 720 BC on the coast of the Gulf of Taranto, on the south coast of modern-day Italy, Sybaris was the brainchild of Achaean and Troezenian settlers who looked at the fertile land and said, "Let's build a city where no one ever has to lift a finger again." And they did, spectacularly. Thanks to absurdly fertile soil and a port busier than your sister's back door on a Friday night, Sybaris quickly became the wealthiest colony in the Greek archaic world. It was the largest Greek city in Italy, boasting up to 300,000 inhabitants, a population size that would make even modern urban planners weep into their spreadsheets. But Sybaris wasn't just big, it was extra. Its inhabitants became famous among the Greeks for their debauchery, wild all-night parties, feasts, and drinking to excess, to the extent that the words Sybarite and Sybaritic have entered the English language today as words to describe opulence, luxury, and outrageous pleasure-seeking. If you need a modern equivalent, think Las Vegas, Ibiza, Ayia Napa, or any British nightclub at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. This was a place where people went to get wasted, off their tits, wired to the moon. This was a place filled with people desperate to leave their bodies behind in a hazy cloud of dust, rhythm, and pure, unfettered excess. If they'd had modern drugs in ancient times, you would have found them at Sybaris. Sybarites didn't just enjoy luxury, they weaponized it. Their feasts were less dinner party and more culinary orgy. Think 12-course meals, wine fountains, and enough scented oils to drown a small army. If you weren't massaged by at least 2 hot male servants before breakfast, were you even Sybarite? One tale claims a Sybarite sued a blacksmith for disturbing his nap with the sound of hammering. Another insists they trained horses to dance at dinner parties. These people didn't just want comfort, they demanded it with the intensity of a toddler denied screen time. Their beds, stuffed with rose petals. Their streets, perfumed. Their priorities, questionable. Sybaris ruled over smaller colonies in the region, presumably by offering them scented candles and threatening to withhold spa access. Their influence spread like olive oil on a marble floor, slippery, fragrant, and impossible to ignore. Sybaris is also home to mankind's first known patent laws. One of the first documented examples of intellectual property comes from the city, where the new culinary creations of bakers and chefs was protected by law for a period of up to 1 year. After that 1 year, you could steal your neighbor's new sauce recipe as much as you wanted, but not until then. But every glittering empire needs a buzzkill, and for Sybaris, that buzzkill was the nearby city of Croton. And just like how I spent my 20s, the higher I got, the harder the come down. If Sybaris was Las Vegas, think of Croton as the Vatican, strict, devoid of parties, and angrily watching people who dared exhibit a hangover in their presence. Croton was a nearby city which was founded just 10 years later by the same settlers who clearly had a flair for urban sprawl. Croton was the yin to Sybaris's scented yang. Where Sybaris was indulgent, Croton was disciplined. Where Sybaris threw feasts, Croton trained athletes. Where Sybaris banned blacksmiths for being noisy, Croton gave birth to blacksmiths and trained them to make the strongest swords. It was like that time, also in my 20s, when I spent a few weeks dating a gym freak fitness fanatic. It was just never meant to be. To have both of us occupying the same space at the same time was a recipe for disaster, just like Sybaris and Croton. Tensions simmered until around 510 BC, when Croton finally snapped and destroyed Sybaris in what historians believe was the ancient equivalent of flipping a luxury table. Shit hit the fan when a new populist tyrant named Tellus overthrew the government of Sybaris and kicked the 500 richest citizens out of the city so that he could confiscate their wealth. These 500 millionaires then fled to Croton for safety. Annoyed that the rich folk had just gone to live the life of luxury somewhere else, Tellus then demanded that the city of Croton return the exiled citizens to Sybaris for proper punishment, to which the Crotonites responded with a very definite no, followed up by the words, "Suck it." Enraged by this, Tellus gathered an army of 300,000 Sybarites and marched on Croton. Although they were outnumbered 3-1, the Crotonites not only safely defended their city, they went on to completely annihilate the Sybarites before marching on Sybaris and tearing its walls down. What was left of the Sybarites were driven out, their rose-petal beds trampled and their wine fountains turned into sad puddles. And really, it could only ever turn out one way. Check out this handy table I made to help us all understand why there would only ever be one single outcome. And it didn't look too good for Sybaris. Take the national pastime, for example, where me and Sybaris very much enjoyed partying, getting wasted and napping all day. Croton was far more into wrestling and eating kale. So we can see already we're not off to a good start. But how about infrastructure? What are we made of? Well, me and Sybaris are mostly formed of wine and lard, whereas her and Croton were very strongly made of gym equipment, flat stomachs, arse cheeks so tight you'd break a finger if you dared slap them. As for our reputations, Sybaris was well known for hedonism, debauchery, and generally just all of the good fun stuff. Croton, however, had a reputation for being angry at people enjoying the good stuff and not taking life seriously enough. And so with all these things in mind, our fates had been written in stone long before we realized. Where Sybaris was cancelled by discipline, Croton survived with their abs intact, their heads held high, and their swords covered in the blood of idiots who wouldn't turn their music down, even late at night when people should be sleeping. To ensure the Sybarites wouldn't be returning any time too soon, Croton made the defeat complete by redirecting the nearby river Crati to flood Sybaris completely. Life do be like that sometimes. It was the ultimate clash, wellness versus wine, discipline versus decadence. And of course, the disciplined ones won in the end. They always do. And that's why I spent the first half of my 30s being incredibly single. And so it was, that a little over 200 years since its foundation, the stupidly rich city of Sybaris was destroyed. Anything that could be burned was burned. And anything that couldn't be burned was smashed, torn apart, stomped on, smashed again, then flooded. Just to be sure. Now, before we continue, let me briefly take a split second out to remind you that, according to people who know YouTube, videos that get liked and subscribed do better than those that don't. So if you have enjoyed anything so far, please do that liking and subscribing. It helps the channel, or at least that's what they say. And so, back to the wee video thing I made. Fast forward almost 60 years and the descendants of Sybaris returned to refound their city under the pretense and rather misfounded belief that our fathers lived here once, so we'll live here again today, and we'd like you to try and stop us. Croton watched the new settlers and decided they would do exactly that. The new Sybaris quickly rose in power and wealth, helped again by the incredibly fertile land around the city. But Croton returned once more to smash it back down. The resources of this area, you see, needed to be controlled by only one city, and they certainly weren't for sharing. Annoyed by yet another, ass-kicking at the hands of Croton, the remaining survivors of New Sybaris appealed for help from Sparta, but Sparta didn't care enough to help the little Sybarites. So they appealed to the great city of Athens instead, who were all too happy to jump in and claim some of the glory. And by glory, we really mean resources and money. Fast forward a little bit more to 443 BC, and the Greeks returned under the ideals that life was not over yet. Athens, never one to miss a chance to meddle, launched a reboot. The new city would be called THURII. Built partially on the ruins of the old city, it was meant to be a pan-Hellenic utopia, a fresh start with 10 tribes representing different Greek regions. Pericles himself backed it, and settlers included Herodotus, the famous historian, Lysias, the famous orator, Protagoras, the famous lawmaker, and Hippodamus, the famous architect. And yes, I do mean that Herodotus, that Lysias, that Protagoras, and that other guy, you know, the one they call the father of European city planning? Yeah, that Hippodamus. Athens didn't send some copycat named thieves. These were the OGs. Basically, Athens sent its all-stars. Now, it wasn't just the famous Greek rich folks who decided to found the new city. They were also joined in large numbers by actual descendants and some still living exiles of the original Sybaris, which I'm sure must have been very annoying for the people of Croton to watch, still gloating at their beating of the previous generations. To have their descendants then rock up in new boats, all with the intention of doing it all over again. And this time, under the protection of Athens, it was going to be a bit harder to kick them back into the sea. But here's where it gets messy. The Sybarite exiles who joined the new colony demanded privileged status, essentially trying to reclaim their old elite position. They wanted to be treated as founders, not equals. This didn't sit well with the rest of the settlers who were trying to build a fresh, democratic society. The Sybarites' entitlement led to internal conflict, and eventually they were expelled from THURII altogether. So yes, the Sybarite exiles managed to ruin their second chance by trying to turn THURII into Sybaris 2.0, complete with scented politics and legacy claims. Their downfall became a cautionary tale about how not to behave in a Pan-Hellenic reboot. With them gone out of the way, the new city of THURII got right back on with it. THURII thrived briefly, but then came the Lucanians, mountain raiders who occupied the area around southern Italy, and who were very adept at raiding Greek cities and stealing all their stuff under the guise of, "That's pretty and I want it." In fact, the Lucanians were so successful that it forced the Greek cities of the area into a defensive alliance, forcing the old enemy of Croton to join hands with THURII in defense of Greek lands. However, the Thurians were a bit too impatient to wait for the full support of their new allies, and chose instead to take the initiative and meet the Lucanians with their own army of more than 15,000 fully trained, big, angry men with big, sharp, pointy sticks. The Thurians were initially successful in their first fight, and maybe got a bit too big for their own boots as they decided to keep pushing and followed the Lucanians into their own territory, where things took a turn for the worse. At the Battle of Laos in 390 BC, the army of the Thurians was completely annihilated, with over 10,000 of their own men cut to pieces. The city of THURII was now defenseless, and very much up shit creek without a paddle, and it was time for its residents to realize their city would never be the powerhouse that they had planned for it to be. A century later, the Lucanians returned to besiege the city, and what was left of THURII sent out another call for help. This time it would be Rome who would take the chance at seizing the resources under the pretense of help. The Romans were successful, and THURII became an effective vassal of Rome, controlled in all but name. Shortly after this, though, THURII was destroyed for a final time by Hannibal of Carthage, in his campaign to unsuccessfully wipe Rome off the face of the earth. So, that's 2 cities down, 1 more to go. THURII may have gone, but the great fertility of its valley meant everyone and their gran had an eye on moving in to make some money. Being the closest of the most powerful, Rome got there first. In 193 BC, Rome stepped in and founded Copia, from the Latin word meaning abundance. And it's also related to the modern English word copious, as in, hey, there's a copious amount of dead bodies lying on the ground here. Do you think it'll be a good place to found a new city? And the answer apparently was yes! Built on the same site as THURII, Copia was a Roman colony with classic grid planning, bathhouses, temples and forums. It was practical, orderly and refreshingly unscented. Copia served as a regional hub under Roman rule, but never reached the flamboyant heights of Sybaris or the intellectual ambition of THURII. It was the Roman answer to, let's just build a city that works. Copia existed as a small city for most of its life, but in 72 BC it was lucky enough to feature in the campaigns of insurrection and revolt led by the escaped gladiator Spartacus. Yes, that Spartacus. The man who led an army of 70,000 former slaves against the might of Rome and defeated several armies in the process. Spartacus captured the city and then was quickly defeated by a certain Gaius Octavius, father of the future Caesar Augustus. Despite this brief moment of glory in the history books, Copia remained a relatively small settlement and, well, things got worse as the nearby river shifted and dropped its dirty mud all over the current area. As the city slowly found itself landlocked and further from the sea trade it relied on, its inhabitants slowly moved away and the city was finally abandoned completely at some point during the Middle Ages. Eventually, the ruins themselves were buried by sediment from the Crati River, which was probably just nature's way of saying, enough with the scented nonsense. For centuries, the three cities lay forgotten, a cautionary tale lost beneath layers of mud, hangover, and regret. Then in 1932, archaeologists rediscovered the site. They dug through centuries of sediment and found the remains of cities that once believed extreme comfort was a civic virtue. Today, you can visit the ruins and marvel at the infrastructure, the layout, and the sheer audacity of a civilization that tried to turn luxury into a human right. The word Sybarite survives in modern language to this day, referring to someone devoted to luxury and pleasure. So next time you see someone complain that their oat milk latte isn't the right temperature or their silk sheets aren't quite silky enough, just remember they're channeling their Sybarite ancestors. Sybaris, THURII and Copia weren't just cities. They were experiments in how humans build, rebuild and, repeat mistakes. Sybaris shows what happens when luxury outpaces logic. THURII reflects the Athenian dream of unity and how thinking you're harder than you really are can ruin everything. Copia is Rome's answer. Order, infrastructure and rules. No former gladiators allowed. Together they form a layered narrative of ambition, collapse, reinvention and burial. Today you can visit the ruins and marvel at the infrastructure, the layout, and the sheer audacity of men that kept trying to make this land work. So what lessons can we take away from this tale of three cities? Well, for one, I reckon that maybe there is a God after all, because every time I learn about a city being all fun and hedonistic, filled with laughs and debauchery, which honestly is my kind of place, I also then learn that it was eventually destroyed. And maybe that's not a coincidence, or it is a coincidence, and nothing lasts forever. We can learn that too. I think I've also learned that if your city's motto is nap first, defend later, you're not making it past 500 BC. Sybaris banned blacksmiths for being noisy. Croton trained warriors. Guess who's still standing? But also, if your city does get destroyed, maybe don't rebuild it on the same cursed plot. Sybaris, THURII, Copia. 3 attempts. 1 muddy grave. It's the ancient version of stop trying to have a picnic next to the sewage outlet. It's just not going to work. Perhaps we can also learn that history repeats itself, especially if you keep rebuilding on the same spot. Sybaris was destroyed, THURII was defeated, Copia was buried. At some point you have to ask, maybe it's the land that's cursed. And talking about land, don't forget that nature always wins. The Crati River buried all 3 cities. Luxury, ideology, infrastructure, None of it beats layers of sediment and tons of mud. And with that in mind, it's almost time to skedaddle. But not before we also quickly remind ourselves of the names of the people who have names which also belong to the world's greatest Patreon members. Those being Merlichi I, David R, DD, Anthony T, George H, Thad S, A, and Stephen. Thanks again, you beautiful humans. As for me, I'm off-ski. It's time to go and do some shit. Peace, love, and hedonism. Good! Bye! I love you, love you, love you.